And it was much later, early 2000s, I believe, that the biological mechanism that associated smoking and lung cancer was finally discovered, right?
You really did inspire me through this conversation that there is a lot of, I think the business could help out a lot to, be very bold.
It has been observed in many studies, many observational studies, that babies that were born from mothers that had a moderate consumption of alcohol had better outcomes than mothers that did not have any consumption of alcohol. Talking about mild.
My name is Jarosław Harezlak.
I'm Kamil Kramicz.
I'm a professor of biostatistics at Indiana University in the United States.
I'm a supply chain expert with a focus on global transformation projects.
I primarily deal with more efficient use of data coming from medical experiments.
I'm passionate about leadership, continuous improvements, and culture in the global business landscape.
So just wanted to say that all the opinions in this podcast are our own and they do not represent the institutions that we're associated with.
Right, we've talked so much about cultures and people, and I mean, we love people, that's what it is. We love relationships and how it works. But Mando, I'm really interested. Your field your field of work is actually very interesting as well. While it's very interesting for me, I don't think I know quite a lot about it. I mean, I've tried to get myself prepared and and not prepared at the same time, because I really wanted to have this good opportunity to someone to actually talk about it without getting a bias or something like that. But you work. What is your field of study? What's it? What's the actual thing you work on?
So I'm a biostatistician. So my area is data and data mostly from health research. In particular nowadays, I'm working a lot in kidney research, just because my group. I'm co-director of the Center for Kidney Research here at the University of Sydney. So my research, my applied research, focus a lot on kidney research. But broadly, I'm really interested in getting inference, so getting conclusions out of observational data. So in biostatistics, there's or let's say in the medical field, there is two sources of empirical knowledge. The experiment that usually are called a clinical trial, where you actually intervene. The researcher has an active role of intervening in a certain exposure and manipulating that exposure to try to find an association with certain outcome. For example, when you trial a vaccine and you see if the vaccine is efficacious or not, that you can do that with experiment. And there's other ways of collecting evidence, which comes from observational data. So basically just observing what's happening in nature and then trying to make conclusions out of this. Obviously, this is problematic. There's quite a bit of challenges. In the medical field, it was not always recognized as the right way of drawing knowledge. There's always been this tension between rationalism and empiricism in medicine. Nowadays, obviously, there's a mixture of the two ideas. This idea that you derive knowledge from derive conclusions out of the knowledge that you have of what happens at the cellular level, and then you understand the organs and so on. But this is really hard because human bodies are quite complex. So you have to rely also in empiricism, in just looking at the nature and drawing conclusions out of it, either from experiments or just from observational data. For example, and just to understand where this tension comes from, the relationship between tobacco consumption and lung cancer, which is nowadays everyone knows about it. This was sort of discovered in the 40s. By just noticing that in a study that was not related with tobacco consumption but exposure to other types of pollutants, And the researchers noticed that the smokers had a higher incidence of lung cancer. And this is where the all research and the evidence start appearing. And it was much later, early 2000s, I believe, that the biological mechanism that associated smoking and lung cancer was finally discovered, right? But during all this time, there was this empirical evidence that in fact smoking caused lung cancer. So yes,
we use this word cause. So
causal. So this is something that is being developed in the last 30-40 years. This idea of creating a framework of being able to draw a causal relationship between something that you observe, right? So as statisticians, and you probably, Kamil, also heard about this famous sentence about correlation is not causation. So something that we observe and there's another event that we observe at the same time, they can be correlated, but not necessarily one causing the other.
So
and this
I heard when I've asked Google to tell me what is causal inference, it told me in one sentence, it's about separating the cause from coincidence. Would you agree with that? Is that a fair sentence?
No, I think this is a very it's not a complete definition because we're not talking about the problem in observational data is not about coincidence, it's about common causes.
Right.
So there's associations that are not coincidence, but they are due to other factors. For example, a simple example, given that we talk about lung cancer, it was common. Fortunately, the number of smokers is decreasing substantially in the world, but it was common that smokers who tend to drink coffee as well. So if you looked at the association between coffee drinking and lung cancer, you'd find a statistical correlation, you'd find an association, right. But it was because of the smoking. And if you didn't know about the smoking, you could conclude that drinking coffee causes right. Lung cancer, because a lot of the coffee drinkers have lung cancer. So the separation of the causal effect is exactly trying to isolate the effect of tobacco and trying to minimize all other aspects that are associated with tobacco and lung cancer. It can be exercise, can be diet, all those things, and try to drinking and trying to conclude that there is actually a genuine causal effect.
If I can just add something here, maybe. So what you said about it, this is actually interesting, because sometimes like Google or whatever tries to define something really like in one sentence.
Yeah.
What I would say, what was coincidence was that when we started recording this podcast, it started to rain. This is pure coincidence. If we were recording this podcast, let's say 10 times, and every time when we started recording would rain, this is, I would start talking about association. But then we would for sure try to find a different explanation. It's not that our recording of a podcast is causing the rain. That would be, of course, when I say it, yes, we all laugh here because it's like, yeah, that's crazy. But going, Armando, to your example about smoking and lung cancer, people are trying to explain it in other ways. And sometimes there are other ways of explaining a phenomenon. So we call it also like, and I'll let you address all those more complicated things because it's one of your areas of research, but confounding and, things, these other things that could either confuse or explain the phenomenon that we want to study.
Exactly. So the technical words that Jarek just mentioned, the confounder is this common cause to a certain exposure of interest in a certain outcome. Okay. And we end up seeing an association that does not exist, at least from the causal perspective. Okay. It's just a fluke, if you want, in the data.
Because this is, if we look at the commonalities between the world of business and the world of academics, it's the root cause is probably the one thing which we always have as a, as a common denominator. Everyone is looking for the root cause, because if you eliminate it, and again, I'm saying root cause because that's what the business is saying. You probably have a number of iterations of that thing. What do you mean by it and what it is in this particular example? But if we can find a way, let's say manufacturing is my main area, you quite often find a situation where you have a similar machines or similar environment, and you have all the systems that get the data. And Jarek, in one of our previous podcasts, you say like it's actually much easier in manufacturing because you can get this data. It's there. It's something which is digital, or it's something which is very easy to interpret as well because it's not a human being. You don't have this element to it. But quite often, you put some actions in place, and it just doesn't work. It works on one, and it doesn't work on the other. And we had this joke. I mean, I had a continuous improvement manager, which basically that's there. So if you think that's probably in the business world, that's probably I'd call your line of research actually goes into a business. So you're trying to learn how to solve the problems. And he used to say, 80% of the problems solve themselves. But I actually think that's not the case. I think we haven't just identified all of those correlations around, the environment or all of the areas around there that just changed. I don't know, the weather. We got to, summer changed to winter, and the air conditioning started to work, and the materials changed or something else as well. And I'm really, this is an area where I think the business could benefit the most from any new methodologies, any new findings. Is there have there been any breakthroughs recently that, I could actually use, or the guys are listening to us?
That's exactly one of the challenges with observational data, because even if you have everything, if you control for all these confounders, you still have a lot of noise, and the problems tend not to be deterministic, meaning that if you change something, the outcome is always going to be the same. There's some randomness, some noise in the entire process. So what you're observing might be just pure noise. If you want, the coincidence that things, despite this being a cause, like people that smoke not necessarily will develop lung cancer. Some people develop, some people don't. But if you smoke, you're more likely to develop lung cancer. And this is a cause, right? So this is something that if we switch, the likely of the outcome of lung cancer changes as well. Right? But we don't know all the factors that lead to lung cancer, right? We don't have this deterministic, nice explanation of the entire system, the complete model for how things work. Now, regarding your question, and because I said in the past 30, 40 decades, the interest in causality has always been present in science. This is really what we look for most of the times, is really causes of things and trying to identify causes. With observational data, I would say that, especially in medicine, this has been always a very difficult and actually controversial problem. And even nowadays, it's still controversial. There's a lot of top journals in medicine that still avoid causal language when coming from observational data, because there was not a unified or a consensual or generally accepted framework for establishing causality. We are getting there. We are starting to have a theory, a statistical / epidemiological theory around causality, rigorous, that establishes what are the conditions necessary for you to establish causality of a phenomenon. And this is quite important. It doesn't make the problem more simple, but at least defines what are the conditions and what you have to assume, and what you can test, you cannot test. So it is a statistical / epidemiological problem, but we're starting to have that framework, and this hasn't been there for many years.
All right. When you say starting,
go on. Sorry, if I may go back to your question as well with kind of manufacturing, and so I would say in manufacturing, when you collect the data, but also if you can change like this, you turn this knob one way or the other, This was, I would say, it's more similar to like a clinical trial experiment
Okay.
where you control the conditions. But let's say if you were collecting data, not from manufacturing, but let's say from sales, you don't really have the control. This is observational data, yes, because you might, as long as you don't have restrictions on producing, you deliver the product, but you don't know how much of the product will be sold, and you would like to predict, and actually worked on a small project on that last year.
Sure.
You would like to predict, how the sales will go, but you can't really control all these things that are happening outside. But still, you would like to go to your boss and say, look, if we do this, the sales will change in this way, but this will be based on observational data. So going back to your question, and Armando, your answer, it's you are trying to, so this theory, or there's more that has been done over the past few decades that can enable you to actually make such a statement with more, I don't want to say certainty, but at least it's a principled statement based more scientific way of making such a prediction.
And you can, and I guess you can get to scenarios much easier, and the scenarios are in a much more educated way because you have some mathematical model behind it, and you can actually the ways how you define the scenarios can be probably, I guess, cut in a more educated way.
It can be more distilled, yes.
Right.
It can be more
So
analyzed.
All right, you use the word starting to get there, and look, I'm a business guy, so Armando, I need this now. When can we get it? So, because when we talk about it, the more I go into it, this is probably something that it would change my life. I mean, starting to get more educated conversations around places where we don't have the data, like not the manufacturing, but Jarek, you mentioned sales, but it might be. It might be motivation, it might be, a large group of people, it might be all of those things around there that I'm already seeing so many opportunities there. Are we just starting, Armando? Are we at the end? How does it look like? I know the world never ends for science, but where do you see?
No, the developments have been around for several decades actually.
Right.
Are becoming, at least in the medical field. There's been very recently, in the past months, there's been a discussion about how much the journals, which basically define the progress in the research, because it's where we share the knowledge that we produce in research, and there's been a discussion in top journals about the use of this causal language. This causal language from observational data. There's several journals that still prefer or still are quite defensive and conservative in the approach, and they prefer to refer to these associations as just statistical associations and not necessarily drawing causality, because causality it is a very strong word, right? We imply that one thing clearly causes the other. And so there's always some skepticism, which is healthy in research. There's been a bit of skepticism, but this will change because this framework is being simplified, and I think it's a matter of a couple of years at least in terms of culture to change in our field, in medical field. I know these things are these cultures are very different from area to area. I know that in economics and in political science, for example, that also uses a lot of observational data. The language is more accepted than in the medical field.
I think
just one thing.
Yeah. Go for it, Jarek.
Sorry, just one thing. So I don't want to name the companies or the people, but actually one of our colleagues was hired by one of the big companies to actually introduce those ideas in the business world. And this is something, that the companies actually started spending money on because, well, they must find usefulness in it. So in a sense, as you said, Kamil, the science never ends, we never have this final, there are some sciences we know like E equals mc squared, but such things, especially when the human behavior comes in, when kind of medicine is concerned and so on, this will be an evolving kind of process. But it's not like it's only in academia that we're talking about, some theories, but it's actually the theories that have been developed, that are being developed, are incorporated in business world already.
Absolutely. I was thinking, I was actually wanted to say the nature of your research being, medical studies, when you say causality is a very strong word. I'm actually seeing a big potential over here, to go to probably a bit of a ring-fenced area in business, and I'm sure there would be a number of those that we could identify where we could almost just risk to go with those statements with causality and push it a bit more without causing harm to any human beings, because I'm guessing that's where the bits are. But
that's the big
but I'm
challenge.
thinking,
Yes.
you really did inspire me through this conversation, that there is a lot of I think the business could help out a lot to be very bold in a very controlled environment where the last thing that can happen is that the project's not going to go ahead, or we're going to have some learning, so we're going to go for it. But actually I think the business world could enable quite a lot of trials and errors, so being very brave and courageous with certain statements and see and test how it works. That's something I'm definitely getting out of it, and I'm really interested in.
Happy to share some resources if you want to learn more about the area.
Right, we can
actually put those resources on on YouTube. This is one of those things that we can add some of those things there.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I guess, have you had any? I mean, both of you guys, have you had any funny examples or maybe surprising examples where causality did actually show up in your study, and you thought like that would never happen, or you would never think something like that, or something is causing something else, or.
I'll share something that is not my personal research, but it was something that it intrigued me, because by coincidence I had found something similar. So it's a reverse story to that.
Yeah.
It has been observed in many studies, many observational studies, that even in large studies, so very consistent result again with observational data, that babies that were born from mothers that had a moderate consumption of alcohol had better outcomes than mothers that did not have any consumption of alcohol. Talking about mild. But obviously this puzzled always the researchers and clinicians. This is, you could argue for no effect, but saying that there's a positive effect, this is obviously very, very controversial. And as far as I know, none of these studies concluded actually that this was positive. But they would say we found this association that mothers with mild consumption of alcohol
and this was during pregnancy?
During pregnancy,
okay.
Their babies had better outcomes, so they were slightly heavier, and even in terms of IQ later in life and so on. So everyone knew as well that there's all these potential confounders, these variables that could confuse, that could be social status issues. Women that consume moderate amounts of alcohol during pregnancy might be of a higher status, and this we know that is associated with also better health outcomes and so on. But even controlling for these, there's always been this effect popping up, and finally when the studies were designed, in this case I'm going to throw just a technical term, but with the Mendelian randomization technique, it was shown that in fact there was no association there, like there was no positive, no benefit of moderate drinking for pregnancy. So this finally put an end to this puzzling finding that was popping out of the data, and really showed that as the good sense or the common sense would just suggest that there is no protective effect of alcohol consumption during pregnancy. Okay. So it's not necessarily a funny, but I found it very, very interesting example of something
Right.
that the proper framework was able to solve.
Right, fair enough. So it's actually it's a good example of where something I'm passionate about, or really not passionate about, is those facts that just pop up and sort of you have a bit of a sheep effect, because it sounds so great, or it sounds so sort of interesting that you almost discard all of the information about it, or you don't have the tools to actually get all of the other stuff there to get it. So it's actually I'm really interested in this field. You expect a phone call right after that. I wanna hear much more about it. The last question, which is the most important one, Armando, from your field of study, is can you with your study tell me when Bitcoin's going to go up that high as it has last week again?
Well, the last days shows promises trends, but who knows? Whoever found out the formula for that will not share with the rest of the world for sure.
Let's not.
If they do, everybody will start using it, and it won't go up again. So it's one of those. This is where the human behavior comes in, and this is actually, you alluded to that, Kamil, was the medicine is one thing, but when actually psychology and the human behavior comes in addition to kind of like functioning of the organs versus what we think about it and how we want to influence it, especially this thing, the brain. That's we are far away from that, I think.
Absolutely.
So, do you think it's a good place to stop?
I think so. Look, let's just say at the end, thank you so much for this. This was just absolutely brilliant. So thanks for spending the time. Thanks for all of the, absolutely, interesting and exciting insights. This has been, more than pleasure for me to listen to all of and get your perspective on some of those really important things. So thank you for that. That was really happy. And like you said, you're the first official guest, and I think you've set the bar so high that it's going to be so difficult for anyone else to reach it right now. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much for it. It was really a pleasure to meet you finally and to have this nice conversation. All the best for your project.
Thank you, Armando.
Thank you so much.
This was great.
Right.
Yeah.
If you find the topics in the discussion interesting, please do subscribe and push the subscribe button, because that will allow us to make many more interesting subjects into our conversation.
Yeah, we will have guests. We will have, we'll talk about other interesting topics. So let us know. What do you think?
Let us know what you think and push that button, please.